Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Data for Governance webinar, which marks a significant milestone in the pursuit of database advocacy and citizen-centered governance in Africa. At today's webinar, titled Strengthening Human Rights, Democracy, and Governance, we'll be launching two very resourceful tools for civil society organizations in Africa. The first is the Data for Governance Alliance Advocacy Manual, a comprehensive guide designed to provide CSOs with necessary tools and knowledge to conduct effective database advocacy. And the second is Data for Governance Scorecard on access to courts during COVID-19, which measures and tracks access to justice during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Data for Governance Alliance has been actively working to promote database advocacy and engagement between Pan-African civil society organizations and members of the African Governance Platform. Last year, the consortium conducted several convenings, bringing together CSOs, AU member organizations, and experts to deliberate on key issues, challenges, and opportunities in Africa. Building upon these insights and outcomes from these convenings, the Data for Governance Alliance successfully developed two essential resources, the D4GA Advocacy Manual and the D4GA Scorecard on access to courts during COVID-19. Today, we're going to hear more about these two resources, as well as testimonials from CSOs and AU organs. Before we get started, I'd like to do a quick round of introductions. I am Shannon van Wyk Kosa, and I will be your moderator for today. And we also have Nansata Yakubu, and Nansata is the consortium's advocacy trainer, as well as the author of the D4GA Advocacy Manual. We also have Marina Chindia from Laws Africa, Chrissy Dube from Good Governance Africa, Bright Sefa from the African Peer Review Mechanism, and then from the Data for Governance Consortium, we have our project coordinator for Southern Africa, Nyasha McBride Mpani, as well as our project coordinator for West Africa, Paul Aborampa Mensah. Before we get started, I just want to take us through some house rules. So today the session is being recorded and streamed on YouTube, on the Afrobarometer YouTube. So you can check out the chat. There's a link there. Please do go onto your Twitter, share it, get other people involved. And then we have a Q&A feature as well. So if anything pops up while our speakers are giving their presentations, please feel free to type your questions in. And then we have a 20-minute Q&A session a bit later on, and I will be reading some of those questions. The social media hashtag for this conversation is hashtag African Voices for African Policy. Again, hashtag African Voices for African Policy. And if you're looking for handles to tag on Twitter, it's at Data for Gov Africa, at African LII, at CDD Ghana or CDDGH, at IJR, at IDS _ UNOBI, and at Afrobarometer. That's a mouthful. So that's all in the chat. You didn't have to remember all of that. You can have a look in the chat if you'd like to follow along. Tag us, please. We'll be retweeting a lot of the content that comes out of this conversation as we go along. Okay, so let's get into our program today. I'd like to call on Paul, our project coordinator for West Africa, to give his opening remarks. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you very much. And let me say a very big thank you to all our panelists who have made time this morning to join us, especially our colleagues from the African Union organs. Thank you so much, Bright and Gimsu, for your time with us this morning. And Chrissy, we also appreciate your coming. So as our moderator has already indicated, this is Data for Governance Alliance, comprising 5 civil society organizations located in various parts of Africa. So we have the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana, which I'm part of. We have the Institute for Development Studies, based in the University of Nairobi in Kenya. We have Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, based in Cape Town, South Africa. Then we also have Laws Africa, our legal CSO partner, who has been helping us to digitize most of the AGA organs, protocols, and other legal documents across Africa. The 4 consortium members are coordinated by the Afrobarometer. That's the lead consortium member partner for these projects. Since we had this go-ahead agreements with the European Union some 2 years ago, we've been working hard to support the implementation of the African Union Agenda 2063. Our focus has been in 3 thematic areas: governance, democracy, and human rights. And we've been partnering with most African Union organs to make this a reality, supporting the ABLE activities, the ECOSOC, the APRM, the Youth Envoy's Office, and all the organs have been doing to make sure that we achieve our aim of getting the objectives of Agenda 2063. Last year, we, as part of our activities, we organized 3 major convenings between September and October 2022. First one happened in Accra. We had a second one in Cape Town, and a third one in Nairobi. The convenings sought to bring together our partners, civil society organizations, and the African Union organs on one table to share ideas, to go through some of the research data we have, and see how we can fashion a common agenda towards achievement of the Agenda 2063. As part of the convenings, we also engage our dear partner and sister, Nansata, to help us get a form of a document that can serve as a resource toolkit for our civil society organizations to guide their advocacy so that they have a guided way of informing advocacy and engaging with both the regional bodies and their national governments. Today, the manual is ready. In addition to the manual, our partner, Laws of Africa, have also been producing briefs. And one of it was a production of a scorecard. And most importantly, during the period that most of our countries were in lockdown, what happened during that period is what is in the scorecard. So we are gathered here this morning to launch these very important documents so that our partner CSOs or other CSOs and the African organ units can have access to these documents and guide their advocacy going forward. On behalf of the Data for Governance Alliance, I welcome you to this webinar. Thank you. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for that expansive overview of the consortium. I think now let's get into the resources. So I'm going to hand over to Nansata. As I said, Nansata is the consortium's advocacy trainer, as well as the author of the Advocacy Manual. Nansata, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. I think we are on different parts of the continent, but it's still morning in most places, except maybe Nairobi. Yes, yeah. Good morning and welcome. Today, I'm happy to share some of the highlights from the work that we did on the Advocacy Manual. And then when they say I'm the author, sometimes I just say, hey, maybe I helped along the process. We had 3 great convenings last year and very engaging, very animated participants from the convenings in Ghana for the West Africa region, the convenings in Cape Town for the Southern Africa regions, and indeed the convenings in Kenya for the Eastern Africa regions. So what we've done in this advocacy manual is to make sure that the database advocacy we are talking about is also very much evidence-based. So we worked with practitioners, we worked with activists, we worked with academics across these 3 regions in Africa. And then we took their experiences, their context, their realities, and made sure that these kind of benchmarked, the theoretical basis for advocacy in Africa. So that very much reflects the context that we want to do. So this manual is a tool, that is aimed to articulate some of the database advocacy ways we can use to engage as CSOs within the ecosystem of civil society, and also African Union governance, African Union organs, and indeed our national government. So what is this manual about. The manual is looking at how we can use data, to be able to engage policymakers and decision makers in Africa. And we are looking at how it will help us to better understand the process, advocacy as a process itself, how we can develop effective advocacy strategies that will support the engagement that we are having with other institutions, and also how we virtually track our processes and progress through our advocacy issues. So we have named it a tool for articulating data-based advocacy. You will see that right on the front of it. And why do we think that CSOs need these tools? We are looking at how CSOs continue to hold governments, accountable in their bid to advocate for the rights, of our citizens. We know that we have both duty bearers, and then we also have those of us who are obligated to do some stuff of the state. But at the same time, if a government is left unmarked, if governments are left unchecked, we all know that sometimes it doesn't really help in the development discourse, and indeed in arriving at some of the development results that we want to see. So that is what this tool is about. It's going to be able to help CSOs to better inform their engagement, to better inform their policy processes, and to be able to track the progress that they have amongst themselves for particular issues and also with authorities. So we have put together why it's important and what CSOs can use this tool basically to do. They can use it to collect data, for instance, on the rights of women, on climate change, on children, on youth, on adults, on different aspects, of the spectrum for all the work that we do across the sub-region. And we are also looking at how it can be used to improve the quality of advocacy that CSOs are able to bring to the table. It provides you with the right way to access data, how you analyze this data, and then how it makes you clarify your arguments, be more informed, and make your arguments more persuasive. You can have an argument, but you can go to engage a policymaker and you are not able to persuade this policymaker. So we are looking at a tool that can make this argument persuasive for you to be able to go on with your work. Next slide. My slides are being supported by the Afrobarometer team. So next slide, please, Josephine. Thank you. Yes, we have a couple of features that we have put on there for you to be able to notice. And what we are saying is that advocacy itself as a concept, what does it mean? What does it mean for CSOs in our part of the region? What does it mean for the work that we do as CSOs? So we have a whole conceptualization clarification issue in the manual. And it has different dimensions, from how you view CSO as an animal to how you view CSO in your work, and how you view data advocacy and CSO's work. Would you say that advocacy is a main tool? Do you budget for advocacy? Or advocacy is the one that when you have finished the program, you say, well, let me invite one media person, because that is what you think advocacy is about. Are you dependent on the media or another CSO to communicate the results of your work, your impact? Those are some of the things that, so we clarify what the concept means in different dimensions. And we also look at how advocacy is a civil society toolbox. So you would see all the tools that you need as a civil society organization to be able to use advocacy and leverage on all the important nuances that it has. We also have that for you. There's a criteria for the strategies for advocacy. Why you engage in advocacy as a CSO, we have that. Then the tactics. How do you define your tactics? How do you prioritize your key stakeholders? And remember, we are doing this within the ecosystem of how you engage with AU organs and other organs and national level and CSOs in your country, in the region. Those are, so who are your key stakeholders? How do you prioritize key stakeholders? How do you undertake problem tree analysis? And we've given a gender equality example, which we worked with participants across to see how what are your basic elements of advocacy? When you think about advocacy, what are the basic elements? And then for data for governance, we have put in a cycle so that you see that if you want to utilize data for some of your governance interventions, what are the kind of cycle? How do you benchmark the progress and go in a continuum. Those are some of the things that we have also talked about. Then we give you a sense of advocacy and data-driven advocacy. In more ways than one, when you say advocacy and then you say data-driven advocacy, people think it's just an issue of semantics. Or, hey, there they go again. They brought another new concept. Every time development practitioners are bringing new things or trying to, we want you to add to the literature through your work. We want you to understand that advocacy is good, but data-driven advocacy is better and excellent because you can advocate. But if you are advocating without evidence, if you are advocating without numbers, without visuals, without a story, without structure, what are you advocating for? We get very interesting, examples. Could say that you could just arrive in a marketplace, and start screaming, I want the temperature of the day to be at 20 degrees. You could do that. But nobody would even know what that is about. At the same instant, you could be there and you could say, this temperature is at 20 degrees because then you give your data. You could use climate change data. You could use practices for the environment. There are a lot of things that we can do. So we want you to know that there's advocacy, but then there's also data-driven advocacy. So we have a picture. What's the purpose of advocacy? That you persuade decision makers to take action. Now, with data-based advocacy, as they say, you are persuading decision makers to take action based on the evidence. So you can persuade them. We have a bad case of sanitation in my community. Yes, it's advocacy. So you are there to pursue. We have a bad case of sanitation in my community. For the past 3 months, the trucks that collects the refuse have come only 3 times. These are the schedules. These were the numbers of the cars that came for the thing. When we talked to them, they said the landfill was full. And we went to the landfill, and you need to make sure that you have your data to back whatever you are doing. If we said the methods of storytelling, you can tell a story, very, very nice story, emotional story. You can do that. When COVID was happening, we heard stories of how people had died, and it was very emotional. People's fathers died, people's mothers died, everybody died. So you could say, oh, COVID is here and people are dying. I even lost my mother and I lost. That is emotional. We will sympathize with you. But how does that help, to solve COVID? Yet you saw the numbers, you saw the statistics, you saw the research. How do we even get infected with COVID? It was a major issue about why it led to more people dying. So we are talking about how in data-based advocacy, you are coming with the numbers, the specifics, the research. And then in advocacy, you tell the story, So we are talking about how you leverage and add an X factor to the layer of your advocacy. So that is the main thrust of data-based advocacy. Can you be more or less persuasive to decision makers? Do you have access to the data? Because most times decision makers always need what we say 72 hours a day from the rest of us. We need 24, they need 72. So if you are going to speak to a decision maker and you don't have your evidence, you don't have the data to back it up, how are you going to be able, to go on with that? Those are some of the things. In advocacy, we continue to say focus on the results. Focus on the results. If you are going to focus on the results, you would realize that data-driven advocacy has become a very important step in the ecosystem of the whole general advocacy movement. If you are just going to shout at the top of your voice, nobody listens to what you are saying. So we are saying that focus on the results. This is the data, this is the research, these are the numbers, and this is how we have been able to do, or we are processing to do advocacy. Remember that decision makers are always overwhelmed. If you are going to meet any policy maker or decision maker, remember that they are always overwhelmed. And once they are overwhelmed, in that case, you need to be able to send cogent strategies, cogent issues that you can work with. Then you should know that not everybody is fighting your battle. Sometimes you meet, very passionate people who work in development space, and they will tell you, oh, I'm working on these issues of legal access for women and children. Very passionately. And then when they are speaking, they say, we all have to make sure that this works and all that. They forget that the work that we do as CSOs is like an elephant. Everybody holds a part of it to do. It is when we aggregate the results, so I may not be as passionate about women and children today. I may be more passionate about access to transport for persons with disability or a different part of the development divide. But then it's how you present so you don't expect that everybody is on your side. That is why you need to be able to identify your key stakeholders, to let them know that these are the people who are invested in terms of resource, in terms of research, in terms of activating, the advocacy space for you. Those are some of the few things that we have put in on the manual. We are looking forward to why it is important for CSOs to use this manual. It's a utility tool. It doesn't prescribe. It is not a manual that prescribes that you must do advocacy in this particular way. It is a manual that prescribes to you the best ways possible of leveraging on your experience of the advocacy that you are undertaking in your region. So if you take the tool and it tells you that how are you defining your tactics, it will give you an outline of how to define your tactics, how to get a whole basket of good tactics. It doesn't tell you what tactic is the best, but immediately you look at them, you will know that, oh, this is how I need to create my tactics, and how I need to put them in like a stage, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, so that it's not all together. So we are not saying that it's a tool that will prescribe what you do, but we are saying that it's a tool that is going to guide you in how you continue to leverage on your advocacy journey. I know that there's an FAQ part of this conversation. So I think I can end here as an intro, and then we can take the conversation forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nansata. Thank you for sharing that incredible advocacy resource with us, particularly in today's data-driven world. And I think the really important emphasis that you put on the corresponding storytelling when we are working with data-driven advocacy is something that we should all be taking note of. So we're going to be dropping the link to that. It's been uploaded on the D4GA website. We're going to drop the link in the chat. But I'd also encourage you to please head over to the website. It's dataforgovernance.africa. There are a range of resources. We also link out to the Laws Africa platform on that site. So yeah, please do head over there. So as we said, we are launching 2 resources during this webinar. The next person I'm going to call on is Marina from Laws Africa to introduce the scorecard on access to courts during COVID-19. Marina, please take it away.
Thank you, Shannon. Good morning. I would like to welcome all the participants attending this webinar, and I will now proceed to present the D4GA Access to Court Scorecard key findings and delve into the Africa's legal landscape in the initial phase of the COVID-19 period. I would like to emphasize that these scorecards aim to provide a quick snapshot indication of how selected African countries performed in terms of providing access to courts during the initial month of the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa. The scorecards provide snapshot assessments on key elements of the right to access to courts, including examining whether or not the courts were open to the public, the type of cases entertained by the courts, and the extent to which judiciaries use virtual hearings as means of providing the public with access to courts. The analysis of these scorecards offers valuable insights into how selected African countries managed to access courts during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. By assessing key elements such as open courtrooms, the types of cases handled, and the adoption of virtual hearings, the analysis helps to understand the extent to which these countries upheld the right of access to courts during challenging circumstances. The scorecards are not intended to provide a complete and exhaustive analysis. Instead, they give a sense and offer a snapshot indication of the state of all affairs in each jurisdiction during the specified period. This is because the research was primarily conducted through desktop analysis, and some of the information was not available online. So therefore, these scorecards provide an overall view of how these African countries responded to the pandemic's impact on access to courts. It highlights the strengths, identifies areas for improvement, and serves as a basis for future discussions on enhancing the legal system's resilience and adaptability in times of crisis. I will now highlight the selected countries covered in these scorecards, which are Kenya, Eswatini, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Ghana, South Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, Botswana, Malawi, and Zambia. The scorecards cover the period from 20th March to 20th April 2020, and this corresponds to the first month of the COVID-19 outbreak in Africa. We'll begin by looking at the extent of physical courtroom operations on the first slide. The scorecards reveal varying degrees of physical courtroom operations during the research period. Some countries like Tanzania and South Africa, as you can see, maintained limited physical court operations, while others such as Eswatini and Zambia faced significant disruptions in court proceedings due to the pandemic. The AU Agenda 2063 Aspiration 3 on Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law requires states to respect and protect human rights at all times, including during periods of public emergencies such as COVID-19 pandemic. The right of access to courts, also known as the right of access to justice, is very critical for the protection of all other human rights, and therefore critical for the achievement of the AU Agenda Aspiration 3, as stated earlier. So you will notice the disruption of the right of access to courts set the continent backwards in terms of its progress towards achieving Aspiration 3. And going forward, the continent member states need to incorporate within their disaster preparedness strategies of ensuring that people enjoy access to courts even during periods of public emergencies. Overall, as you can see from the first slide, the disparities in preparedness across these countries resulted in uneven access to justice during the initial month of the pandemic. Countries like South Africa, Tanzania, and Kenya were better positioned to adapt, while Zambia and Eswatini faced significant challenges in maintaining their judicial services, especially in addressing urgent matters and providing support to vulnerable populations. On the next slide, we'll look at the nature of courts open. The nature of courts that remained open varied across jurisdictions. Higher courts, which would be the high courts and the Supreme Courts, remained operational, whereas lower courts experienced more closure or restrictions in operations in terms of physical courtrooms. On the next slide, we'll look at the type of legal matters. The scorecards indicate that certain categories of legal matters were prioritized for hearing during the initial outbreak. Urgent matters like criminal cases, domestic violence, and cases involving fundamental rights were given precedence, while less time-sensitive civil matters were delayed. However, you will also notice in countries like Lesotho and Eswatini, the judiciary's lack of preparedness hindered their ability to provide essential services to citizens. With limited capacity for virtual hearings and the absence of proper court rules for such scenarios, these countries struggled to maintain normal judicial operations. This led to delays in addressing urgent matters such as child protection cases, domestic violence cases, and remand processes. On the next slide, we will look at the virtual hearing preparedness in the first month of COVID-19. The impact on access to justice across South and Eastern African countries was quite diverse. South Africa, Kenya, and Tanzanian judiciaries demonstrated a higher level of preparedness by implementing rules and procedures for conducting virtual hearings. Therefore, being better prepared, they were able to adapt more effectively to the disruptive event. They were equipped to handle virtual hearings, ensuring that court proceedings could continue despite physical limitations. Other countries like Lesotho and Namibia faced challenges in swiftly adapting to virtual proceedings. Furthermore, You'll notice from the slides the inability to conduct virtual hearings, like in Eswatini, deprived citizens of any form of remote justice. In essence, domestic violence matters suffered in 5 out of 11 countries where victims were left without proper legal resource during a time when support was crucial. What were the data sources and limitations? In coming up with the scorecard data, this was primarily obtained through desktop research and key informant interviews. It's important to note that the scorecards offer a snapshot indication and may not provide a comprehensive view of each jurisdiction situation. What were the access to justice implications? The scorecards highlight the potential impact of the pandemic on access to justice. The scorecards also assess the extent to which the right of access to courts, which is an international human right and a domestic constitutional right, was protected during the first month of the pandemic. Disruption in court operations and limited physical access may have affected citizens' ability to seek legal remedies and have their cases heard in a timely manner. There were notable regional disparities in the response to the pandemic's impact on courts. Some countries like South Africa, Kenya, and Tanzania managed to maintain a relatively smoother transition to virtual hearings, while others like Botswana faced greater challenges in ensuring continued access to courts. Let us now review some adaptive measures. The scorecards underscore the efforts made by various jurisdictions to adapt to the unprecedented situation. Implementation of virtual hearings, introduction of new procedural rules, and prioritization of urgent cases indicate the willingness of these countries to innovate in order to ensure continued access to justice. Please note that these key findings provide a general overview, and for a more comprehensive understanding, a thorough review of the scorecard would be necessary. Find more information on the African Lead platform, which is being displayed right now. You would go under topics on the homepage. There's a tab for briefing papers. Under topics, there's a tab for briefing papers, and you will find the scorecard there. I invite you all to browse through the free online access Continental platform for regional law and policy information. The platform also contains briefing papers on pertinent topics on AU law and policy. It is a legal resource hub for anyone interested in national and regional governance. The primary goal of the platform is to provide a full research environment that is useful in day-to-day activities of the African Union institutions, organs, the regional economic communities, and the regional court of justice. For questions about the content of the scorecard, please email info@laws.africa. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Marina. I think also just to reiterate, if you have any questions right now, please do drop them in the chat, as we'll be heading into a Q&A session in a little bit. And then if you go and you use the scorecards in your work, particularly online, on social media, please do tag us. We'd love to see just how the proliferation of these scorecards and how people are using them. We're going to head on to our next section, which is testimonials from CSOs and AU organs. But before we begin, I must admit to a grave mistake in my introductions. I did not introduce Gumiso Chithi, and she is from the African Union Office of the Youth Envoy. So we're going to have a few testimonials. I'm going to ask Chrissy from Good Governance Africa to start us off, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. But thank you so much, Chrissy. Please take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Shannon. I think I had the privilege of being in the first convening with the stakeholders last year in Cape Town, and Nansansa's session was actually my favorite one, which was kind of an introduction to advocacy and advocacy training. So it was quite exciting to see the advocacy manual and I think that it will be a great benefit to CSOs. What struck me about it is that the first part deals with training for the facilitator, or it's a sort of guide, because it's easy to assume that a CSO has a trainer, and that might not be the case, particularly for CSOs that might have budgetary constraints. So I was encouraged when I saw that the first part actually deals with the facilitator and making sure that they're equipped for that training, and gives them a basic step-by-step guide as to how to approach the manual and how to train the people that need the training. And the second part of the manual is actually the in-depth training now, and it comprises of 3 modules that each have session guides, exercises, notes, as well as handouts. And the first module gives an in-depth understanding on and comprehension of what advocacy is, as conceptualization is important, as Nansata has already alluded to. And the second module kind of zones in on the granularity of stakeholder mapping and how to engage with stakeholders, categorizing them in the different groups of stakeholders, which is very important for CSOs to know, because not all stakeholders are the same. There's a broad spectrum of stakeholders with high impact and high influence to the lowest group of stakeholders that are, less impactful and less influential, not meaning that they're less important, but you just need to target and categorize the strategies appropriately for the different groups of stakeholders in that regard. And this will assist, CSOs in terms of channeling their efforts towards the different groups of stakeholders when they understand the people that they're dealing with. Is it policymakers? Is it the community? Is it businesses? Advocacy should be directed to specific people, and the right type of advocacy should be different for different people. And I think the most important module is the one that focuses on data analysis and visualization. I say that this is the most important because I believe that data is needed to make informed decisions. So it's easy to advocate for something, but if it's not fact-based, then it is not as influential, or it doesn't have as much meaning as it could have. And CSOs need data analysis and data visualizations to provide, whether it's society or policymakers or business, with fact-based knowledge and meaningful information to back up what they are advocating for. So overall, I believe the Advocacy Manual is an effective training and capacity building tool. It offers CSOs that have challenges, whether it's with funding or logistics, an actual tool that does not limit them to having to go to train for advocacies in other states or regions or other cities. They now have a tool that they can use in-house despite the logistical or financial challenges. For example, CSOs that are in marginalized areas that aren't able to attend advocacy training, they will now have this tool at their disposal. I believe the manual is an empowerment tool in this regard, and it's going to make a difference in the CSO space and help CSOs to be more strategic and plan better around their advocacy. And I think that's my testimonial about the tool. Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Chrissy. I just want to give a note that Chrissy has to jump off as she has another convening, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, Chrissy, for contributing today. And if anyone has any questions, please do pop her a mail or send it to us, and we'll be able to forward it on to her. So thank you so much, Chrissy. Next, we're going to move on to Bright from the African Peer Review Mechanism. Bright, please, can you give us your testimonial? Thank you, Bright. You're on mute. We want to hear your voice.
Sorry about that. Good morning, colleagues. And just as a minor correction, I am with the African Union Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, AU ECOSOC, which is the civil society organ of the African Union. I'm quite happy about the development within the spaces of the civil society organizations that we are working with. But to begin with, I would want to express appreciation on behalf of the head of ECOSOC Secretariat, Mr. William Carew, for giving us this opportunity to engage with civil society organizations and like-minded institutions that we have here. I think one of the key areas of our work that we always want to enhance on is civic engagement. we would want to touch more on engaging civil society organizations, and every single opportunity that is presented, being it by trainings, by tools, among others, is something that is very welcoming to the ECOSOC Secretariat. Why we envision we work around such areas is the importance of building the strengths and abilities of civil society organizations to engage at the highest level. As a civil society organ of the African Union, if we are presenting civil society organizations to various organs and departments of the African Union, we want the civil society organizations to be well equipped so that they can engage at the highest level. I think it's on this premise that these toolkits, the manual on advocacy, is that important. I had the opportunity to engage in Accra and in Cape Town, South Africa as well, and I saw how civil society organizations who took part in this exercise also engaged well, and which also led to the development of this particular manual. I am looking forward to sharing the manual with my colleagues on the African Governance platform, so that we can see how best we can also make use of this particular document, so that we can share as well with the civil society organizations that we are working with. So in a nutshell, ours is to congratulate the organizers and those who took time in their busy schedules to develop such an important document. And we are confident that it's going to build the capacities of civil society organizations so that they can advocate very well at the highest level, as we also continue to open spaces for them to engage. I thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll be available to take them.
Thank you, Bright, and apologies for the incorrect designation. Thank you so much for correcting us. Last but definitely not least, we're going to head over to Gomiso from the AU Office of the Youth Envoy. Thank you, Gomiso.
Right, thanks, Shannon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. Representing the Office of the Youth Envoy, Ms. Chidom Pemba. Last year, I also attended one of the convenings in Accra, together with Bright and other colleagues from the African Governance Architecture Platform as well. And it's interesting to note that the discussions that we're having were fruitful, and now we have an advocacy manual as one of the outputs of that engagement, or the several engagements that followed after. So that's a good sign, I suppose. And I guess now that we have this tool, I think one of the most interesting things is that the tool is centered on this long-term vision that we have for societal transformation. And generally, it's an overall dynamic tool that can be used in various thematic areas, like Nansata alluded to. And for us, two key aspects to highlight about the manual. Firstly, it's the power of messaging. And secondly, the importance of the audience, the stakeholders, who are essentially our allies as CSOs in achieving our advocacy goals. And so when we talk about how can CSOs advocate with one voice, and how can they engage in the AU decision-making processes, when we talk about one voice, it also entails the messaging, how well it's put, and when we talk about those key messages and how to convey them to which audience, politicians and regional bodies, they respond differently, for example, based on a minister, depending with the information that they have, the data and the messages that they have received. And so what I'm trying to outline is that this tool provides such guidance on how do you go about the messaging, how do you go about reaching your stakeholders. One of the important techniques that I've seen that are useful are techniques such as the power mapping or stakeholder mapping. And so many times when advocacy initiatives or efforts are going on, sometimes it's general. It's not specific to who are we actually trying to target? Who has the power? Who is in support of our initiative? Who can we convince a bit more? So really the primary audience, which are the targets, or the secondary audience, which is the influential people that we can work with, both as CSOs and even as AU organs in our advocacy efforts. And so lastly, and particularly for us as young people, and even for those CSOs that are working with young people, I'd like to echo what the manual says, and that is that young people around the world are rallying towards a new era of advocacy. And that is advocacy that is backed by data and also fueled by their real life experiences. And that's because data plays an important role in supporting youth voices and to help them to spread the messages about the issues that they care most about or that are important to society. So when we are advocating, for example, instead of saying that young people, for example, make up majority of the African continent, adding the statistic that 60 to 70% of the African continent is made up of young people is a bit more compelling. And so the manual goes even further to outline how to use these statistics to tell a story, to break it down effectively, these statistics for policy advocacy, and also to understand the context. And I think all this makes a difference in your advocacy. So in a nutshell, we do have a manual, thanks to D4GA and team, that provides a step-by-step guide. It is both exploratory and explanatory as well. It provides creative techniques. It is simple and it's useful to both facilitators and anyone else who desires to be trained. So I believe it will go a long way in shaping our advocacy efforts in various mandates, both for CSOs and even for AU organs as they interact. So happy reading and happy usage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gumiso. You've picked up on some very interesting points. We're going to head into a Q&A session. We currently don't have any questions in the chat, so please feel free to drop some of them there, but I've got some questions for everyone. Gumiso, I think you spoke about some really interesting points around particularly understanding who your audience is and making sure that the message targets them specifically. Can you take us through what that process looks like for your team at the AU Office of the Youth Envoy in terms of putting together a data-led advocacy campaign from kind of the inception to what that like targeted message in the end looks like?
Right. So perhaps I can give an example of one of the activities that we have done over time. And this started last year when the Youth Envoy was just getting into her role and starting over. She engaged in what we called listening and engagement tours. And this was basically going down to young people, finding out what the problems were, what their desires were for a renewed Africa. And through that process, it was also a process of collecting data, both on the ground and through an online survey. And after that, this data was collated and it was presented, for example, to education ministers, highlighting some of the education concerns that were raised from them. And after a meeting with ministers across Africa, this led into the development of what we call an transforming education document outline summit that was held along the sidelines of Transforming Education Summit in the United States. And so that became a platform to present this document to say that we went to young people, these are the issues, we collected data, we presented it to ministers across Africa who adopted it. And now we've got a document that we are presenting as young people on how to transform education through the regional body, the AU. And so that is sort of the process that we go through, the use of data, highlighting the issue at hand, what data have we gathered, who are we targeting, the most important people to pass that document or the idea that we need to be expressed. And those were the ministers. And this was even presented at international platforms as well. So I think that is kind of the process, highlighting that the importance of education for young people, for example. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for giving us those tangible kind of snippets of how we actually go about using this. Right. My next question is for you. You spoke about your excitement around sharing these resources with colleagues. I just want to, in today's digital world, kind of think about what are the best ways of sharing these things. If you can kind of give us your insights, because there's a lot of information out there. You know, there are lots of people with resources like this, or not necessarily resources like this, but resources where they're encouraging people to use them. But what is the best way to actually spread the message and ensure that we take up implementation of these tools and resources?
Thank you very much. I think for emphasis, the most important thing that we need to take a look at is the availability of the documents as it's been produced by our colleagues here. Now, if you are looking at how we can make this document accessible to users, we have had the opportunity to use various platforms to share information. And for those of you who are familiar with the ways the African Union shares available instruments and documents, it's been through our online platforms and sometimes hard copies. However, we have not managed to share documents as we want them to, simply because some of our websites are very difficult to navigate. And I think some of our colleagues who are on this platform have had the opportunity to engage on this as we try to revamp some of the websites and platforms that are available. We want to use our statutory platforms for starters to share them. We have positioned ourselves in such a way that we can reach almost every corner of the African continent through our national chapters. We are having groupings of national civil society organizations within all the 55 member states. We want to send all these copies to their platforms where they will all have both soft and hard copies as well. We also want to use our various virtual platforms, our websites, our social media handles, and other civil society organizations who operate regional and sub-regional platforms so that we can reach an appreciable number of civil society organizations that we can. As I would want to conclude to talk about some mapping exercises that we are doing to have a group of civil society organizations that we can directly reach whenever it comes to such issues. And it's being born out of the accreditation mechanism that we are building. The accreditation mechanism is supposed to capture the data of every single civil society organization that tries to have access through having been accredited by the African Union. Now, as to whether the civil society organization is accredited or not, that particular civil society's data is captured. We have their information, and it's easier to reach that civil society organization, considering the fact that the mere fact that the civil society organization tries to apply for an accreditation is a testament to the fact that they are interested in the work of the African Union and civil society organizations. So we will use that platform to share every available document, including this particular manual, to those civil society organizations. We are looking very well to enhance, even through our non-statutory bodies as well, and they go as wide as every single civil society organization that gets in contact with us. So these are some of the various platforms, and not forgetting the other platform that we are currently taking on board, the citizens engagement component of almost every single aspect of the work that we do with the other African governance platform members. We also encourage them. We have a meeting with the other platform members next month in Cairo, and this is one of the issues that I personally will be bringing on board to them so that they take on this particular manual and share with their constituents as well to build their capacities. So in light of the questions, this is what I would want to say about that. Thank you.
Thanks for that comprehensive response, Bright. I think you touched on something that's very important in this digital age, and it's accessibility, but it's also usability. So it's making sure that when users land up on these digital platforms, they're able to navigate and find what they're looking for, and also they're able to share them easily. So thank you so much for that. Okay, I want to say thank you so much to Gabriel, who has left questions for Marina in our chat. So Marina, the first one is, could you elaborate on the rationale for the selection of the 11 countries and their representatives? And these are for the scorecards.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Gabriel, for the questions. As indicated, our research was constrained to these 11 countries because it was based on the availability of data. As initially indicated, our data was obtained through desktop research and key informant interviews, and we could only get this as much information as possible on the 11 countries that we have represented on the scorecards.
Thank you. We've got another question for you. So did African Lee have the opportunity to repeat the same analysis on access to courts months after the pandemic? This would be interesting to see because the data from the first month is intrinsically biased as the countries and institutions were still figuring out how to deal with the crisis.
I totally agree with Gabriel's sentiments. But to answer his questions, no, we did not go into the months after the pandemic. As he has rightly put it, it would be interesting to have seen how the countries adopted going forward. But basically ours was focused on the first month, and just to also offer countries an opportunity to see where they can improve going forward in terms of public crisis or public emergencies such as COVID-19. So we are hoping that this would actually bring to light for any judiciaries or any jurisdictions which are lacking in this respect to actually try and adopt to ensure that there is always access to courts for their population and citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina. Our next question is for Nansata. It's from Daniel Iberi from Kenya. He says poor data quality due to limited resources for data collection, lack of standardized methodologies, and insufficient capacity for data verification have constantly undermined the credibility of advocacy efforts on the continent. Does the manual contain data quality improvement strategies? Thanks, Nansata.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. It was also refreshing to hear the reflections from all the other participants and institutions, and I'm happy most of them have seen that their experiences have been validated in their manual. Thank you, Daniel. So we touched on that and some of the strategies for how you arrive at the right data. And I think a key framing is you must make sure that you identify the right data. That is the problem actually with advocacy. Now, how do you identify the right data? Luckily for us, there are several institutions that already have credible, reliable, authentic data, data that is not just made up over 2 or 3 instances and put together, but you do have that. Now, the Afrobarometer resource itself is a very big, part of that. We had that. We also had other organizations present during these convenings on the right ways of getting data, be it on legal issues, be it on other civic issues. You have AU databases. So we do have first how we direct you to databases, on how you can access data that is already cleaned out, that is already correct. Then we also have ways on how how so to speak, how you would make your own data. So for instance, you have survey results, or you do have a pattern of occurrences within your project space. What kind of tools? We have different tools, more than up to 20 different tools on how you use that data to get the right data to communicate. We do have different, we shared a lot and they are all reflected within the manual. I'm trying to do it in a way that Daniel will quickly open the manual to the page that has those data tools. So we do have a data tools. Then we have some of these tools who actually give you data sets. So you don't even have to think too much. You put the data in and then you can go through different data sets per countries, per region. We have those data. Then we also have tools that will let the data tell a story in visual form, because we've realized that sometimes the reports or research findings are dense. And if you want one person to sit there and plow through 30 pages, 40 pages, it's a problem. When Marina was presenting, you saw how quickly, she showed some graphs and you can quickly see what measures, comparisons. We have tools there that will quickly also do that for you. So yes, indeed, there are a lot of resources that would really support your work in the manual. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nansata. My next question is for Nyasha or Paul, whoever would like to answer. Nansata spoke about adding to the literature and the fact that this is not a prescriptive tool and that really the evidence and other people using it is quite an important part of growing this. As the consortium, how do we operationalize this? How should AU organs and CSOs get in contact with us so that we can share the work that they're doing using these tools that we're talking about today?
Thank you, Sharon. And in fact, I've taken the manual as Christians have taken their Bibles. And since Nansata gave me the drafts, I've gone over and over again. And for me, even though I've been in the field of advocacy for years, I'm still learning. And this manual has put me in a state that I think I was doing a presentation on Ghana's local governance last week. And in every slide I pushed, I mentioned Nansata. Because of the rich information and experience the manual has taught me. Usually, I used to say Ghana's local governance voter turnout is low. But with this manual guide, I had to reshape my slides and to give figures from the time Ghana started having district level elections, what have been the turnout rates. And I could see when I made that slide presentation, the applause I got. Meanwhile, I have been making this presentation year in, year out. But this seemed to me a unique figure because I was able to tease out in a table form since we started district level elections, what have been the voter turnout per election. And this brought out a different shape. And I wasn't surprised at all that the German Development Corporation, since the presentation, have tasked us to do a nationwide advocacy to increase citizens' interest in district level elections. So for us at Data for Governance Alliance, which have an aim of working with Pan-African civil society organizations, trying to bring them to a level that, as Bright said, you can have a very valuable engagement at a higher decision-making point so that we just don't rattle, we just don't make noise, but we are giving information that is necessary, that has value, that can inform some policy uptake. That is what we stand to get. So for us as CSO, fortunately for this year's convening, we did not have agenda for advocacy, repeating advocacy training. But the management of AB sought no, because this is very much important objective to our program for the 3 years. In all the 3 years, we are going to repeat the advocacy training. And we are going to bring the consultants to probably reshuffle her cards and see what aspects must I add this year? What can be the different aspects that will add to the manual? The manual is ready. How do we use the manual? Probably that will be the next phase. So this is the angle we are going to go from to ensure that the manual is not just produced, but we encourage people, build capacity, give them information as to how effectively the manual could be used.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. Nyasha, do you have anything to add to what Paul has said?
Thank you, Shannon. I don't have anything much to add as to what Paul said, but I think just to reiterate that we are going to try all we can within our consortium to make sure that we have distributed this manual to all the CSOs across the continent, as well as to share it with all our AU organs so that they can be able to popularize this document. We don't want it to gather dust, but we want it to be used by many CSOs and AU organs in their advocacy work. The thrust of our project is we want to reshape the way advocacy is being done across the continent. That is why we emphasize data-driven advocacy. So we are going to keep on pushing to make sure that each and every CSO in every region, in every district across Africa gets this manual and use it in their different field of work.
Thank you, Nyasha. Yeah, I think completely getting it out there and making sure that people are using it. And then please do get back to people like Nyasha and Paul and John in each of the regions, and let them know if you have success stories coming from this. As Nansata said, this is something that we would like to add to the literature. So please do be in contact with us about how it goes when you implement some of these resources. So I think that is it for our Q&A session. Thank you so much to everyone for all of your insights and for really kind of fleshing out the presentations and giving us real life examples of how these resources have been used or how they could possibly be used. I'm going to hand over to Nyasha now, who is going to give us an update on the convenings. It's busy season for the Data for Governance Alliance. So we're very excited to hear from Nyasha. And then he's also going to give us his closing remarks for this webinar. Thank you, Nyasha.
Well, thank you, Shannon, once again. So to all our colleagues who are here online, we're getting into our season for physical convenings. So this year we're going to have our convenings in September up until November, and we are going to do them in all the regions, that is East, West, and Southern Africa. The Southern African region is the one that is going to start on the 25th to the 29th of September. And unlike the format of last year, we are going to ensure that this year we are going to have all the AU organs present from day one up until the last day, so as to increase networking, collaboration, and cooperation between our CSOs and our AU organs. Last year, the civil society organizations that attended our convenings, they highlighted that they did not get much time to interact with the AU organs. So we have managed to recalibrate our program and to ensure that we have got all these AU organs present from day one up until day 5. We've also reshaped our agenda for this year. We are going to primarily focus on different topical thematic areas that are affecting our different regions, so that CSOs can be able to discuss these areas at a regional level with the AU organs that are going to be present on our convenings. So our regional leaders are going to get in touch with all our CSOs, send you invitations to be able to come to our convenings. Because of resources, our consortium can only be able to sponsor a certain number of society organizations to come and attend these convenings. But however, we are also open if there are any civil society organizations who would want to self-sponsor themselves and be able to attend these convenings. You are also welcome if you can be able to self-sponsor. These convenings are very important, and from them we've learned that we are trying to break the silo approach of working, which has been quite evident quite some time between AU organs and civil society organizations. So we want to break that silo approach and promote cooperation and collaboration as we try to advance Agenda 2063. So keep glued on our social media pages where we're going to share some of these dates. They've also been included on our chat by Josephine. So you can also check, and you can also just drop us an email and we can be able to give you more information. We are also going to be conducting more webinars with different AU institutions. For instance, the Charter on Children's Rights, are going to have a webinar with them in the 3rd and 4th quarter, as well as with the African Commission on Women and People's Rights. So keep glued on our social media pages. Once again, I want to thank you all for attending this very important webinar. The resource is now there for you. Feel free to use it. Feel free to also share it with some of the CSOs that are within your network. Let's not be selfish with the information. Let's share it widely so that these tools are effectively used in promoting data-driven advocacy in Africa. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyasha. Before we close, we actually missed a hand. So we have a question from Muta Wakilu Mahama. Muta, please unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Since my question was already answered by Paul Mensah, so I have started to extract it, and I will get in touch with him. Fortunately, I have a direct contact with him, so I will get the further details from him. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Please do get in contact with Paul. And also if you're in the Southern African region, Nyasha, and East Africa, John, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. But yeah, we'd really love to be in conversation with everyone. Okay, so that brings us to an end of this incredibly insightful webinar. I want to say thank you so much to our panel. Thank you for all of the behind the scenes work also, because everyone here has been working on this for quite a long time. We all met for the first time last year. It's beautiful to see the culmination of all of this work. And I think it's going to be really exciting when we all get together again this year. And then just a reminder that we will be in Southern Africa in September, West Africa in October, and East Africa in November. And we'd love for everyone to join us. And then please do keep up to date with us. So as I said before, we've got the dataforgovernance.africa website. At the bottom of that page, you can subscribe to the newsletter to make sure that you don't miss any updates. And then we're also on Twitter. Our handle is @Data4Gov. And we're also on LinkedIn, and our name on LinkedIn is Data for Governance Alliance Africa. So please keep in contact with us. We'd really love to have you at all of our forthcoming webinars and convenings. And thank you so much for being a part of today's discussion. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, everybody. Bye.